I think one of the reasons they're hard to get right is just like our mothers told us not to go in the pool in, an hour after we ate because we, get cramps and fall to the bottom of the deep end and drown. There's a lot of received wisdom out there, some of which is partially right, so myth isn't necessarily 100% fair. Some of which is probably just flat wrong. And, I grew up in the support community with these myths, and I think many of us did. I'm not making fun of any of these, by the way. This is all stuff that from time to time, or almost all stuff that from time to time I've believed and now executed with the best of intentions myself. But I think it's just worth exploring and unpacking it. And the standard package for this sort of metrics myths is top 10 metric myths. And I tried hard to boil it down to 10. But I found that just like Nigel Tufnell in Spinal Tap, I was unable to get it down to 10. I ended up having to make ours go to 11. So we have 11 metric myths that I'm going to, or half-truths, that I'm going to explore, and I hope we'll explore as a group. I'm going to stop at the end of each of them and ask for you to comment or chime in, or ideally offer an alternate perspective if you have it. And the way that I'm going to address many of these myths is through various thinking from various friends of the consortium over the years, folks who have spoken to us or whose books or words have inspired us, because I think they offer a useful perspective on some of these myths. So let's go ahead and get started. We got a lot of these rules, things that have been handed down on the stone tablets, and it's worth taking a look behind. One of my favorite myths, because it sounds so good, is that goals should be smart. I don't know if any of you have heard about SMART goals or have SMART goals in your organization. And it sounds kind of difficult to refute. SMART goals is one of these cute acronym things for they should be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound if you're setting goals for individuals. And I think, going back to the factory days, at least way back in the days of yore in sort of Taylorist times, that this kind of SMART goal setting made sense. But if we think about, let's say knowledge management or KCS, what specific measurable goal are we going to get? One of the things that the consortium has long said, and we all know, is that we don't put goals on activities. And yet, as we know, activities are the easy things to measure, particularly on an individual basis. And so if you've got SMART goals, they tend to be around activities, and we know that we don't want to put goals on those. So here's what the KCS Practices Guide says. We see goals that are on article creation or article reuse. These leading indicators are met, but with the goal of inevitably compromising the quality of the knowledge base. I once worked with an organization that tried to have SMART goals on how many leads they generated for our sales organization. And sure enough, we would get into a meeting where one of these SMART measurable leads had been created. And the people on the other end of the meeting would say your piece and get out of here, because we only took this meeting to get that person off the phone. Right? So they had met their SMART goal, but they totally corrupted what we tried to do them for. We ended up in litigation. Nobody measures software developers by how many lines of code they create. What's a SMART goal for a software developer? Well, you created this module and you delivered this functionality that was specified at a high level of quality and efficiency as part of a team. Well, now that's not sounding all that specific and measurable. The world that we're in is a little bit more complex and nuanced than SMART goals are really able to reflect. There's nothing wrong with being specific and measurable if it makes sense, but if we need to put goals in place that are a little bit more team-oriented, that are a little bit more open-ended, and that are a little bit nuanced and take a variety of activities and outcomes in a balanced scorecard way, that's okay. It's not dumb to not be smart. Anybody struggled with smart metrics or have their organization kind of poke at them about smart metrics?
So, David, this is Melissa. I just wanted to let everybody know that I have muted all the lines.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sure. Just to ensure that we don't have a lot of background noise. We have a lot of callers in today, so I was just double-checking that if you do have any comments, you're more than welcome to unmute yourself. Just wanted to let you know.
Great, thanks. And how would somebody unmute themselves?
So they can unmute themselves by finding the participant panel, and they can review the list of participants, and there is a microphone that's flashed kind of reddish color, and you can unmute yourself by clicking that.
That's great. And if you would prefer, please send thoughts and notes to Kelly and Melissa. But Melissa, who would be better if we want to kind of manage things that way?
Probably to me,
okay.
And that actually highlights that the chat is also available, so everyone can use that to put their comments in as well. So, David, if I get anything through that, I'll relay it to you.
Please do. Okay, thank you very much. So, number one, smart metrics, the myth. Boy, this guy has a higher pain tolerance than I do. This is from Julius Caesar minute. Sometime our masters of their fate. Our fault lies not in our stars, but in ourselves, dear Brutus. There's this idea that actually kind of ties into this last idea that we should be in charge of our own metrics destiny and in charge of our own goals, and that we should be measured and held accountable for the things that we, as the support organization, can really do ourselves. Things like hold time and service levels and transactional CSAT and no matter how many cases, handle time, all of those things that we traditionally hold ourselves responsible for. And then we get up to an executive level and do an ops review, right? And their eyes rolling and people yawning because none of this actually relates to business value. What Greg Oxton likes to say, if you've heard him say it, and you can't possibly not have heard him say this if you spent much time with him, is the value of support can only be measured outside of support. So what on earth are we doing holding ourselves accountable to only our own internal measures? Sure, it's safe. Sure, it gives us a sense of control, but it doesn't really line up to what the business is doing and what the business needs to do. Patrick Lencioni has been an inspiration through his 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, Silos, Politics, and Surf Wars, and other books to the Consortium. And this is my favorite of his, actually, Silos, Politics, and Surf Wars. What he says is that it's really easy for organizations like support to totally optimize their own operation in a way that sub-optimizes the enterprise. And worse still, once you have sales doing the best they can with the leads they've got, think Glenn, Gary, Glenn Ross, and marketing doing the best building up the product, although development didn't build a very good one, and development's doing fine, but professional services can't implement it, and now support has unhappy customers because their product is junk, and you get all of this finger pointing. Look, it's not about what we each do in our own organizations. We need an overall rallying cry, whether that's customer experience, whether that's retention, whether it's avoiding churn, whether it's creating value, industry leadership, right? What Lencioni says rightly is that we need an organizational rallying cry that we can all line up to. And it really doesn't matter. There's no way for the support organization to be successful in a failing company, a company that's not successful. There's no way for any organization to say they're successful because they've met their numbers in an organization that is not doing well. So we need to line up with the other organizations. And as a practical matter, that means we need cross-functional measures. We need measures that go across the organization, and that's a little scary because we can't totally control them. But with them, we get a seat at the table. Mike Rundo, longtime board member and collaborator with the Consortium now at Avaya, has said, I love Net Promoter Score, one of these cross-functional measures, about which more later, because it gives us a seat at the table. It says that, we are part of the overall solution. It's not we're something that happens after all the important things happen. So embrace cross-functional measures and embrace the fact that you're going to need to use influence skills across the organization to drive cross-functional measures in the way that you need to drive them. There's, by the way, we'll mention the Agile Startup later. It's a very trendy book. It's kind of the crossing the chasm right now in Silicon Valley, what crossing the chasm was in the early 90s, I guess. But in the Agile Startup, they talk a lot about the importance of cross-functional measures and actually kind of cross-functional organizational thinking. Another myth that's out there is that the job of leadership, executive leadership and managers, is to set truly ambitious goals. Big, hairy, audacious goals, BHAGs, as the phrase goes. Now, there's nothing wrong with take that hill and having that be an overall vision. So as long as you leave this on a vision level, not only is this appropriate, it's probably really essential. The problem comes when that turns into specific goals. Right? How often do we hear, if we're going to launch or re-energize a knowledge management initiative or a self-service initiative, that somebody comes up with, well, here's the level of call deflection, here's the ROI, and here's what you're going to do, so go execute, right? Go take that hill. That's the wrong level of hill. And I've got a picture of a koosh ball here because many of you have been through the KCS Foundations workshop or a design workshop, or who were at the member summit in Seattle this year, remember the exercise that we did about process change. And it turns out that the people who are in the best position to set their own goals are the people who are actually doing the work, the people who are making the process change. I want to give props to Cognos now, which is now IBM, now part of IBM, but they have been doing KCS for a long time. And in the very early days, they've done a pilot all over the world, a small group of dedicated people. They brought all those folks into Ottawa. And they said, well, we need to figure out how we're going to measure ourselves now that we're going to operationalize this and roll it out across the organization. We need to know how to hold ourselves accountable. And everybody waited for all the managers and directors in the room to say what that was going to be. What happened is all of the managers and the directors in the room said, we need you guys who have experience with this to tell us how you're going to how we should all hold ourselves accountable. And they stood up and they left the room. An incredible act of courage on the part of the leadership of Cognos, and one that really paid off. So, yeah, by all means, paint the vision, executives. Paint the vision, leaders. But when it comes to figuring out how to measure that and how to hold accountable, there's nobody in a better position to do that than the people doing the work. And you know what? 99 times out of 100, they're not going to stand back, right? People want to do the right thing. And they're also more likely to pick disruptive targets that are going to create and require a big change, as long as that's what the vision calls for. Here's another one. You know, the job of support is to deliver customer satisfaction and first contact resolution, or whatever your equivalent of that is, at high efficiency. If we do that, then we're doing a great job of support. Now, this kind of gets back to that cross-functional thing, right? We love these numbers, right? We love getting buried in these internal measures that just say, as long as we are answering the phones quickly and solving customer problems, then we're doing a good job. Well, when I'm in a room with support leaders, one of the questions I always ask them is, why does your organization exist? So why do we do this business? And the first answer I sometimes get is, well, because our products break. Right, that's true. Our products break, and we want to help our customers. Yeah, that's right. Because things don't work the way they're supposed to. Absolutely all true. And we need to do this. But you know what? That's just a piece of it. The reason that we want to help our customers when the product breaks is that we're in the customer success business. We're in the business of helping customers get value from our products. And here I kind of tip my hat to the folks at TSIA who have a very nice framework around the complexity avalanche and consumption economics, and the whole idea that what we're trying to do is not just allow customers to have software that fundamentally works, but to allow them to receive value, what they call, perhaps artlessly, consume features, right? And the customer's ability to consume features has not kept up with, or to create value with products, has not kept up with our ability to shove features into products. And so fundamentally the goal of support is to make customers successful. At one of our executive summits, Christophe Bodin, then at Oracle, now VMC, had a great way of putting it. You know, if once the customer has opened a case, the best we can do is kind of get back to where we started, to get back to zero. What we really need to do is to intervene before that and to make sure that customers never have value taken away from them. And if you view the business of support as enabling customer success and enabling customer value, then all of a sudden, and think about the funnel in the cloud for those of you who've seen that model, all of a sudden, just looking at what's happening after we get a case come in is sort of the least interesting and least important, still very important, but the least interesting and the least important stuff that we need to look at. So it's not just enough to close cases quickly and well. Industry standard measures. You can, I'm sort of dating myself by putting a good housekeeping seal of approval on this thing. But the idea is that, hey, you know, you don't need to go out and reinvent measures, right? Why do that? There's an industry standard package of measures, and you can go to a variety of publications that allow you to benchmark, more on benchmarking soon, that allow you to benchmark yourself against others around a common set of metrics, and that way you'll be running a fully capable and competent support organization. Just follow the industry standard measures, and you'll be fine. Dean Spitzer spoke to us at a summit a few years ago. He's with IBM Research and has done a great job of understanding what measures do in organizations. He has a book that I strongly recommend here on the left called Transforming Performance Measurement, Rethinking the Way We Measure and Drive Organizational Success. And what Dean points out is, you know, if you want to be just like everybody else, then go ahead and measure what everybody else measures. But that's probably not the way that you're going to get differentiation. That's probably not the way that you're going to get real success. And he cites a couple of examples that are really interesting to me. One of them is Southwest Airlines. Now, I wear the United Golden Handcuffs. I have to fly United because I live in San Francisco and I'm in their frequent flyer program. But I'm in that, if you've seen that quadrant thing, I'm in the hostage quadrant with United for sure. I hate it. And I actually sort of like Southwest, and so I fly them when I have a good excuse to. And you know, one of the things that's kind of neat about Southwest is that one of the things I like is that they tend to not get later throughout the day as much as some of the airlines, and they're really good at turning around airplanes. As a matter of fact, you know, just as you're getting off of the flight, you'll see the flight attendants, it's sort of unthinkable in most airlines, I think, putting on their little blue vinyl gloves and starting to clean up the plane, right? Let's get going. Well, Herb Keller back in the day had this insight that the thing that costs Southwest money is airplanes, and that airplanes sitting at a gate do no one any good. And so although there was a range of industry standard measures for how to run an airline, he said, you know, the one I'm going to focus on is turnaround time, right? Because if my planes are at gates, I'm not making money. And so he kind of focused the organization around that. Now, it doesn't mean he ignored everything else, but he focused the organization around turnaround time. And as a result, really changed behavior, including flight attendants being willing to jump in and clean up airplanes and keep things going, which is kind of nice. Dell had early on, when they were doing this very, lean way of building products, they focused on days to cash. In other words, how long between when a customer, between when they paid for a component and the customer paid for the computer that the component's inside. And in fact, they've managed things so it's negative, right? They actually get paid by customers before they pay their suppliers, which is just crazy. And it totally focused them in the way that they sell and go to market and manufacture computers. So all of this is just saying, think about what it is you aspire to be when you grow up, and think about the measures that best capture that. In the consortium, Brad Smith, a longtime innovator at the consortium, did something really clever at one of the companies he was at. He measured margin per case. Like, margin per case? Well, he knew that profitability was important. He knew that reducing the number of incoming cases, in other words, reducing demand for support, was important. And so a way to capture that is margin per case. Now, I don't know if anybody else in the world has ever used margin per case, and I don't even know if it's the perfect measure, right? It's a little hard to visualize. But it allowed him to focus the team on the things that he cared about and that he thought were strategically important. So go and do likewise. Oh, ROIs. I know we have all done at some point or another an ROI analysis. Sighed, pulled up our Excel spreadsheets, had curves that looked something like this, and see how many months out we can make across. And of course, it's always either too quick or to be plausible or too long to be interesting. So we all, well, not you, but some of us, fudge the numbers to kind of make it come out between 9 and 18 months, wherever it is that we think we're supposed to come out to and break even on the ROI and what percent. And then what do? We buy the software, we roll out the practices. Maybe it's generally about buying software, in fairness, or hiring people or something like that. And we take the ROI analysis and we put it in a very, very special shelf somewhere in our filing system, and we never look at it again. Very early in the days of my time with the consortium, we had a KM and HR thinker whose name was Hubert Sonong. And although I'm not sure that English is Hubert's native language, he used some very Anglo-Saxon language to describe what he thought ROI analyses were all about. And he, it may have been the first time in a corporate setting that I've heard that word just used that way by a speaker coming in. So, it's true that the way that we tend, as an industry, that we tend to use ROI analyses is not necessarily helpful or high integrity. It's just a gate that we have to get through. Now, ROI analyses can be great. I mean, first, it is reasonable to make sure that you've got a plausible way of moving the needle and being responsible stewards of your company's money before you spend it. So I think, trying to really assess, can this possibly make sense, is a good idea. I was involved, back when I was with a vendor, I was involved in a project once that was both successful and a disaster. It was successful in that it met its stated goals, and a disaster in the sense that it cost the company way more money than it delivered in value, even though it met its stated goals. So that's a case where like a simple ROI analysis up front would have been really helpful, just kind of, a good check. But the real value of an ROI analysis comes later. It's a model. It's a prediction, right? We say, we're going to do all of these things, and it's going to cost some money, and we're going to get this value out of it. Then the next thing to do is to say, well, did we? Are we? If not, why not? Right? What wasn't quite right about our assumptions. Are we misexecuting? Do we need to engage more customers? And this is very much a lean startup idea about you have a hypothesis that you're then going to test. And the ROI analysis is a very specific sort of hypothesis. And the great thing about testing this hypothesis is then if you're on track, great, well, how can we do better? If you're not on track, well, great. Is there something we can tune or tweak? Do we need to execute a pivot? Do we need to do something more dramatic? Or were we simply unfounded in this, so let's stop this and try something else, right? So the other thing I'd say about an ROI analysis is it's not enough to compel corporate investment. At any time, your VP, or you if you're a VP or a CFO, have 20 projects that you could execute, probably, that would generate positive ROI, that would be financially valuable. So which one of those are you going to do? Because you don't have the organizational bandwidth or the management attention to execute 20 things. Well, you're going to do the things that really line with your strategy first. So the ROI is a gate, but let's look at the strategic framework. For those of you familiar with KCS, and the strategic framework is one of those deliverables that shows how our initiative is helping customers and the organization and our employees in a very clear and simple way, and how we hold ourselves accountable to that, and how it lines up with the strategy of the organization. That's the thing that's going to make this initiative or that initiative, of all of the 20 that we could do with positive ROI, stand up front. So it's the strategic framework that an ROI analysis is an appropriate and a good thing to do, but it is just the starting point of a conversation about the strategic value, and it's just the starting point about what value are we really delivering. And it's a little scary holding yourselves accountable to your ROI, but look, it's a model, it's a prediction, and will evolve and make things better to take advantage of it. I couldn't bear to show another series of graphs, so I'm showing an actual physical benchmark rather than, a benchmark. But you guys know what I'm talking about, right? The idea is, we ought to benchmark ourselves against our industry peers and see how we're doing. And I think this comes from a great place, right? We want data to help us understand where we're doing well and where we need to do better and where we should invest in and what our strengths are and how we can differentiate. And that's all good. As a practical matter, benchmarking ends up often being pretty tough for a couple of reasons. One, often there's a right answer, right? It's not okay to say, well, actually, compared to our industry peers, we're really pretty horrible. In some environments, some good learning environments it is, but often the hunt for benchmark is hunt for justification that we're pretty good and please don't cut our budget. So I don't mean to be cynical, but I've been consultant for a while and you see a lot of stuff. The other thing that's tough about this is that details really matter. I have worked with let's call it 50 organizations when the topic of first contact resolution has come up, and I have heard, let's call it 50 different ways of measuring it. And, same with customer satisfaction. Even if you use the same scale, right, the way and the form deeply matters. I can change a couple of words in your CSAT survey, and I guarantee I'll move the needle by several points one way or the other, right? So it's sort of a chimerical goal. It's not really clear how you're going to get data to really benchmark if it's somebody else. So benchmarking can be great if it knocks you in a different direction. I had a customer once say, that they were moving from 21 days to publish to 12 days to publish new knowledge-based content, and they were very proud of that. And I said, that's great. HP Nonstop does it in 2 hours. Right? Okay, well, so that kind of benchmark gets you to sort of rethink the process. That data can be useful. But in terms of really seeing how you're doing, I encourage self-benchmarking. Really, what you're doing is your own best target, and just as we all have, I hope, happy memories, of, having our height written on the door jamb every 6 months or so. Let's see how we're doing against how we're doing now, because whether things are commensurate or not. Whether it's really fair to compare a measure one after the other. You can decide what's important to you and then just keep doing better. And I guarantee if you benchmark against yourself and keep moving your strategic measures, thinking about, what's your turnaround time, like Southwest. If you keep moving your strategic measures up and keep moving them up and keep figuring out how to move them up, then you'll be best in class in the industry. Right? That's the right thing. So benchmark, but consider self-benchmarking, and that way, you won't be drinking anybody's bathwater. Ops reviews, we love them, right? So every so often, this is, and I worked with, I'm thinking about one organization in particular that I worked with where, every Wednesday morning was just an opportunity for terror, right? Because these metrics would move, and, CSAT would drop by 1% this past week, and, the hunt would be on for the guilty, right? And what's going on. And really, that's a very difficult way to live in an organization week by week. There's been a lot of work, just probability and statistics tells us a lot, behavioral economics tells us a lot, and patterns of leadership tell us first that if we've got a lot of data out there, we're going to find patterns. Humans are really good at that. We're going to find patterns. And, I don't know if you listen somewhat cynically to stock reports at the end of the day. Oh, the market was off, 0.3% as a result of name your international crisis or whatever. I mean, how do you, there are like 3 billion individual trades and things move by this much. How on earth do you know what caused that? You don't. You're just making that up. Humans are really good at seeing what we want to see. Not only do we make patterns up, but we tend to make patterns that fit our pre-existing narrative, right? It's called confirmation bias. And the reality is a lot of stuff happens due to chance, and unless you happen to have a sort of a rigorous stats guy on the staff, which most of us don't have the luxury of, it's really hard to suss out what's chance and what's not. There's a book I strongly recommend called The Drunkard's Walk, and they talk about the careers of Hollywood studio executives who have a run of, good movies and they're praised as geniuses, and then have a run of bad movies and are fired, and then the next year the studio rebounds, of course, with all the things that the same person has in the pipeline. There's just a lot of natural variation in the world. And in particular, I'm reminded of the Israeli Air Force story about a guy who said that, whatever I do, when I have a pilot make a good landing, I praise him and I tell them it's really good. And the next time they land, they don't do as well. And then if they make a really terrible landing, I yell at them, and they always do better. So this praising to get people to do better is a really bad idea, right? You should yell at people when they do badly, and that makes them do better. Well, there's this phenomenon called regression to the mean, that all things being equal, if you've done well one time, you've done better than average one time, you're more likely to do worse than average. If you've done worse than average, you're more likely to do better the next time, right? So it may not be that yelling is good and praising is bad. It may just be a regression to the mean. And fundamentally, the idea of measures is to learn something. And if you are in an environment where measures are used as a mold hammer to hit people on the head with, then you destroy their value as a learning opportunity, because people are going to figure out how to make themselves look good, right? If I don't get a 5 on this interaction, I fail. So is there anything I need to do to get a 5? Well, okay, now you completely corrupted the car sales. I was about to say you corrupted car salespeople ethics, but I realize that's a silly thing to say. So Phil Burgess has this great phrase that measures is a guide, not grade. And Dean Spitzer, again from IBM, says if you use measures to reward and punish, you end up with the culture of measurement that's dysfunctional. And it's the culture of measurement that matters. It's the thing that allows you to learn from your measures, and that's what the measures are all about, right? So Maybe let's back off on the weekly ops review. Let's back off on trying to find reasons for everything that's gone in the wrong direction and understand sort of longer trends and look at our strategic measures and figure out where we want them to go. The ultimate question, Net Promoter Score. I don't know how many of you are using Net Promoter Score now. I'm actually a big Net Promoter fan. I think this is a great thing. I use it in my practice. It's a great way to correlate what's working and what's not and to make changes and to try them and see what's happening. It's cross-functional. So it's really great. Unfortunately, I've seen Net Promoter Score not be this ray of sunshine that you see here in the picture, but unfortunately be terribly misused in support. So it's great, but remember it's a cross-functional measure. So it's not okay to say, would you recommend our support? That's not what it's about. It's would you recommend our company, would you recommend our product, right? And in particular, it's about over a period of time. So I have started to see, and I mentioned in the beginning, this presentation was done in collaboration, initially an earlier version with my colleague Françoise Trenier. This is her like ultimate hot button. I started to see people using NPS, the ultimate question, in transactional surveys. So after a case is closed, they'll go back and ask the customer, would you recommend our support? Or would you recommend us? And that's just wrong. It's a loyalty thing. It's not about the transaction. It's about the relationship. That's just a flat misuse of Net Promoter Score. If you're doing it now, if you have people who are asking you to do that now, please buy them a copy of the ultimate question. Send them my way. I'd like to have an intervention about that because it's really not right. It's not very helpful. And the other thing, so Reichheld has taken a lot of heat from the academic press about Net Promoter Score, saying, well, actually, maybe the data shows it's not the ultimate predictor of loyalty that you say it is. And what he's backed off to, and I think is actually eminently reasonable, is, look, the number itself isn't all that meaningful. It's what you do about it. Right? It's what you do to make it better. It's a diagnostic tool, and it's a tool for self-benchmarking and to see how you're evolving over time. And I can tell you from having seen it as a self-benchmarking tool and a tool for assessing the effective changes that we make given an appropriate lead time, right? Not 2 months from now, but over a course of a year, you really can learn great things from Net Promoter. Oh, I think that, Melissa, this is what got us started, wasn't it?
I think so.
It was contact deflection. So my favorite metric myth, perhaps, I mean, this is the equivalent of Françoise's NPS one, is when we say, yes, we use an industry standard system for measuring contact deflection. Now, I'll leave aside for a moment that contact deflection is a phrase that will tend to raise eyebrows as consortium meeting in general. But hey, at some point we have to talk about it, right? So it's a customer engagement strategy, right? But contact deflection is something that we have to measure, and if the way that you measure it is how many times people click through to search or browse results times some mysterious factor that they came up with through like Einstein's cosmological constant, I would say. I'd say what Hubert Salon said about ROI, right? I would say unless you have some very, very careful validation, which is hard to get of something that didn't happen, that's not right. There are models for estimating this stuff. We've documented it a few times. It's pretty nuanced, right? You need to understand not only the percentage of people who try the web first as opposed to try opening a case first, and the people who are successful, and the percentage of people who, if they were not successful, would have raised a case, and the people who, having raised a case, are able to be de-escalated, right? There are a lot of moving pieces. There's some, kind of Algebra 1 math that correlates to all of this in that paper that's down in the linked there. You can get answers to this, but it's not quite as easy as click-throughs times X. And I think you'll have a lot more credibility talking to your CFO or your executives if you use a model that shows what's really going on. This is really kind of a funny picture of the funnel in the cloud, again, for those of you who like the funnel in the cloud, and the transitions from the funnel to the cloud. And it kind of speaks to people who think about the world that way. All right. And then wrapping up, one of the things that I've heard is if you can't define clear outcomes before you start an initiative of some kind, don't do it, right? Mm-hmm. You can't, if you can't measure something success, then you won't know if you're successful, so why spend the money? Well, we live in a complicated world that's rapidly changing. What's the success measure for your social support metric? Or what's the ROI on that going to be next year, right? Customers are asking for mobile access or in-product access. What's the objective measure of that? I kind of think that in general, in terms of these outcomes that we're looking for, we don't know, and yet that doesn't at all mean that an initiative isn't worth taking on. I'm going back to the Lean Startup here again. Very trendy book, but somewhat justifiably so, I think, in Silicon Valley. And what Reese says is that, you know, in an uncertain environment, which is really what he defines as a startup, and by that measure, I would say essentially all of us doing service innovation in support organizations or elsewhere are in a startup, you know, even if we're inside a really big company, right? Because things are changing, our world is changing so quickly. In an uncertain environment, the goal is what he calls validated learning. Now, this is not, oh, wow, that was a huge failure, but I learned a lot, so it's okay, right? It's not like after the fact saying it's okay that what it is saying, look, you have a hypothesis. This goes back to some of the stuff that we've been talking about. We have a hypothesis about how we're going to create value for customers. And we have a hypothesis about what it's going to do for customers and what they're going to do as a result. And we're going to measure that. And we're going to see how we're doing. And if we are not tracking the ROI analysis, for example, that we did, we're going to figure out why are fewer people using it, are fewer people being successful, are the successful people seeing less value, are they not engaging in the behaviors like renewing that we expected, right? Where's the breakdown there? And what can we do to adjust what we're doing to address the breakdown? And then the Lean Startup has an idea of persevere or pivot, right? Which is that as part of this, having ideas, build it, measure it, get data and learn from it. At some point you say, look, we need to check in to see whether this idea was fundamentally workable and we need to tune it and keep going, or whether we need to head off in a different direction, building on the things that we learned here. That's pivoting. And he has what he calls innovation accounting, which is very different. It's not like dollars and cents accounting. As a matter of fact, he says that if you measure a startup or are in certain environments by dollars and cents accounting, you're going to get the kind of short-term not learning thing that is not going to result in a breakaway success. It's going to result in kind of an optimization generally of what you already have or what feels safe, even if you're leaving a lot of opportunity on the table. So as part of this build, measure, learn loop, what we really need to hold ourselves accountable to is how quickly we're learning about the assumptions that we made, and then how effectively we're taking what we learned from those assumptions and applying it to make things better or to take a different direction. It's not that there's a lack of accountability, it's just a different sort of accountability because of where we are in the cycle. And speaking of where we are in the cycle, that is 11 myths or possible half-truths. And I'd love to hear now, I don't know if we want to unmute people or if there's been anything that's come in on the chat that we'd like to talk about.
We do not have anything in the chat. Let me attempt to unmute people. while I'm doing that, let's have everybody think about... there we go. So everybody's unmuted. So now you're open to ask a question. I heard someone had a question.
Yes, I have a question.
Go for it. Yeah?
Yeah, my question relates to a concept of blank knowledge contribution. And this idea that people have far, Stephen Covey described it as having far more talent, capacity, and intelligence than the job requires or even allows.
Right.
And so I know that David just talked about measures not being really meaningful. But how do you create a knowledge sharing culture? Maybe talk over particular programs like intelligence antennas or measures that sort of thing works now. I'd love to promote that.
Right. So I think the question was, there's a lot, so I'm sorry, unmuting everybody is probably...
No, I went back to, I muted everybody again. So you can respond.
So if we believe the assumption that people bring way more, have way more than the jobs either require of them or demand of them, how do we measure that, and how do we encourage the most out of them? And this is a great question, something that the Consortium has been, I think, working on for a while. We heard some really interesting discussions from Cisco and Stone Cobra in San Diego earlier this year about some of their approaches to that, which included having people writing their own, everybody writes their own job description, and their evaluation is customized to the job description that they've written for themselves, and they're encouraged and or required to visit that job description from time to time. So it's a way of engaging the people. It's sort of, as we were saying, this is not the manager setting some kind of high-level objective. It's that the individuals are kind of saying, here's what I'm in for, and here's what I'm doing. At Cisco, they had the idea of a kind of majors and minors or add-ins where people could do additional types of work that would broaden and grow them based on the things that they were interested in, as well as their capabilities. The Consortium has also been working on opt-in collaboration and intelligence swarming. And I think, and we've seen some good work from Microsoft and Cisco and others, and EMC in this area. I think allowing people to have control over their own destiny and say, here's the stuff that I'm going to work on, whether it's as explicit as Google's 20% time or as implicit as here's a bunch of work in the queue, here's an opt-in collaboration opportunity that I'm going to take, allows people to kind of direct, and the assumption is that they're going to use the things, the skills, and the interests that they have.
Well, great, David. Thank you for that. I don't think I'm going to unmute everyone. However, we would welcome you to unmute yourself if you would like to ask David a question, or feel free to use the chat and I can relay it to David. We don't want to discourage questions. It's just difficult to hear the questions if we put everybody on an open line. So any questions, comments? The other option is you can raise your hand, and I could also unmute you if that's easier as well.
Yeah, I would in particular love to hear somebody who actually thinks that I'm being too hard on some of the conventional wisdom, because in the Consortium we tend to make provocative statements. So I'd love to hear it.
Well, so David, this is, I hear somebody. Jacob.
Yeah, this is Jacob. How's it going, David?
Great.
Good. I think you've got some really great points here, but it's, I think, very counterculture. Some very thought-provoking ideas, but how do you deal with resistance to, some of these concepts are established norms, and it's taken for granted that these are the ultimate truths of how we should measure. how successful we are or how we're doing business.
So you're right, and certainly if I were coming in from the outside, and this is designed to be kind of provocative, I would not say, all right, go and make these 10 changes at once. Thanks very much, bye. I would pick the ones that you think are either most destructive, like transactional net promoter, or where you have an easy opportunity, like carrying your ROI analysis through as a process rather than a one-time event. And I would do it. My experience with executive leadership is that they're pretty receptive to these ideas to the extent that they haven't been painted into a corner by either their predecessors or what they've done in the past. So it's, I think if you can get a senior level audience, use your customers, right? The place that some of the customer health work that Christophe talked about all started during what I can only imagine was a terrifying session with Larry Ellison when Christophe was called in and said, what do you measure? And then Larry said, do customers care about any of that? And Christophe had to say, no. And Larry said, according to Christophe, well, then I don't care either. Go tell me what we should measure that the customers care about. So taking it back to the customers, I think, is always a really great thing. And that's a way to get out of, I think, the support measurement ghetto, right? Your customers, as an aggregate, do they care about SLAs? Yeah, is that the most important thing to them? Well, probably not. They probably don't want to call in the first place, right? So starting there. The other thing that we learned from Mehdi Goker, also at Oracle, was it's okay to keep 2 sets of books. If you are, for legacy reasons, hooked into reporting all the standard measures in all the standard ways up the chain, go ahead and do that. But if you want to create organizational change, let's also measure ourselves the way that we want to be measured and do those things in parallel and see what we learn from measuring ourselves the way we think we ought to be measured. And once we have a little bit of data, once we have some time history, then we've got something that we can take up the chain and say, look, here are the things that we've been measuring for you historically. Here's what they mean. Here's what we've been measuring for ourselves. And although it's a little maybe more ambiguous and cross-functional and difficult, here's what we've learned and done as a result of that, and here's the customer experience impact. And I think, by running those 2 things in parallel, you soften the blow. You're not taking anything away right away. You're just gaining experience about a new metrics paradigm.
Hey, David, I wanted to just offer one other thought on that, too, and that is that oftentimes there's this notion that you have to have an exact number, the exact count, the exact answer to the question, when in fact what you might really need is sort of the ends, and then knowing that your answer is probably somewhere in the middle between 2 data points or 2 basically data points, I suppose. And so that you don't, it actually makes it easier to make decisions when you're not thinking about finding the exact answer, but instead setting yourself up so that you are confident that the answer is in a range. So you're establishing a range. And I think that makes it easier to make decisions, and fundamentally a lot of the information that you provide to executives is really to help them make decisions. And they don't necessarily have to have the exact answer. They just need to know, am I making the right decision or not? So it's helping them make decisions.
I'm so glad you said that. I mean, really the point of measures is to inform a conversation, right, to learn and improve and to help your team and executive leadership make decisions. And ranges will do that. I mean, it's the old joke or cliche about the drunken guy searching for his car keys under the lamppost, right? And his friend says, is that where you think your car keys are? He's like, no, that's the only place I can really see. Dr. Dean Spitzer warned against, the fact that we really want measures that are precise. But he said, the important thing is measuring the right. It's far better to measure the right thing imprecisely or qualitatively, than it is to measure something that's not very relevant with quantitative precision. Right? And so I think giving ourselves the freedom to say, okay, this is an employee survey, right? This is not something that came out of our ACD system, but here's what we've learned from that is really good. So yeah, ranges, qualitative survey, it's all better than nothing if it's measuring the right things.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we've hit the top of the hour, so I just wanted to say thank you to those of you who came and joined us today. I want to really give an especially big thank you to David for sharing his thoughts with us today. We will make David's slides available and the recording available after the meeting. I'm assuming, David, you might be available for a few more questions if anybody has any lingering questions or comments.
Absolutely, either here or by email if there's a follow-up, whatever's good for people.
Yep. So certainly don't want you to run away if you have a question or a comment, but if you need to run to another meeting, thanks so much for coming today. Really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you. Okay, so do any of you have any lingering questions or comments for David before we close out? I don't see anything or hear anyone, David, so thank you so much again. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks
day.
for the opportunity. You too. Thanks. Have fun.
Yeah, it was wonderful, David. I loved it. There were so many things that I'm sure I was the only unmuted person laughing, but I know there were others who were giggling as they saw the slides go by. So
thanks a lot. Yep. Bye.
So thanks so much. Bye-bye, everybody.